What's up, folks? I'm Chris, your NFL writer here at Occupy Fantasy, here with a look at the 10-game slate for Week 15 of the NFL season. I'm going to give you some top plays, picks, and lineup advice for DraftKings and FanDuel. My favorite play on this slate, you see him on the screen here, is Kyren Williams, the lead running back for the Los Angeles Rams. Kyren has a very, very strong role at the running back position. He is seeing over 70% of team carries and a 15% target share since returning from injured reserve for the Rams here. But the biggest thing with Kyren and some of the other running backs I'm about to talk about for you is that what we want to do, especially in our low-risk contest, is maximize our exposure to the highest owned players at the position. That's where the field is going to be, and the field is relatively precise with the running backs especially and their opportunities. Want to maximize our ability to get as many touches as possible from our running backs into our low-risk lineups, and Kyren Williams is one of the most bargain for his price options on the slate at just $7,500 here on DraftKings. A little bit more expensive over on FanDuel at $9,600, but still well worth the price of admission in my opinion. Looking at the Occupy model at the running back position, I have this sorted by DraftKings ownership. Kyren's going to be about 36% in large field tournaments this week. McCaffrey is going to be about 31% for the San Francisco 49ers. Obviously, we know who he is, the best running back in the game, going to have about 25 touches week in and week out, have a floor of 19 plus PPR fantasy points here on DraftKings. The thing with McCaffrey this week that is especially enticing is that the Arizona Cardinals are an atrocious run defense and pass defense against running backs. McCaffrey is going to have a great opportunity to succeed here against the Cardinals. And this is a Cardinals team that he scored 51 DraftKings points against back in week number 4 of the NFL season. He knows how to perform against the Arizona Cardinals. So keep that in mind as you build your lineups this week. McCaffrey in a great spot. Also going to be extremely popular. 9,300. I believe that makes him the second most expensive player available on the board on DraftKings. And over on FanDuel, he's going to be 10,500, the most expensive player on the board. But I do think we still want to get exposure to him definitely in our low-risk lineups because that is where the field is going to be this week. Now, for your third running back in a low-risk lineup, maybe even in your high-risk lineup, the first one that I think everyone will flock to given the news we got yesterday, recording this on Saturday morning, Antonio Gibson with the Washington Commanders has nice correlation with Kyren Williams, with some of the other popular Ram options I'll talk about in a minute here, but he should be the lead tailback here for the Commanders with Brian Robinson out with a hamstring injury. The only other running back really on the Commanders that we should be concerned about is Chris Rodriguez, who may mix in and see a little bit more work now without Brian Robinson available, but Gibson is going to be just $5,200 here on DraftKings. Even better bargain over on FanDuel where he's just $5,600. To be honest with you, I do think this is where the field will end up with their third running back by lock tomorrow afternoon. Currently in our model, going back to the Occupy model with the running backs, we have Ezekiel Elliott at 34% on DraftKings, 32% on FanDuel. Patriots are 8-point home underdogs against the Kansas City Chiefs. I don't know if Elliott actually ends up being the guy that everyone wants to play this week, but it is a great matchup. The Chiefs are the third worst rush defense in the NFL and roughly league average defending running backs in the passing game. We got our first look at Elliott as a starter for the Patriots on Thursday Night Football last week for the Patriots against the Steelers. He had 22 carries, 8 targets in that game. I don't see any reason why Bill Belichick and Bill O'Brien and the Patriots offense will reduce Elliott's workload because they really don't have any other players to feature in their offense. So Ezekiel Elliott is definitely an attractive option at $5,800 here on DraftKings and $6,500 over on FanDuel. I just think that extra $900 in savings for Antonio Gibson makes quite the big difference here on FanDuel. And honestly, in some of your tournament builds on FanDuel, you may want both Gibson and Elliott to allow you to pay up for some better pass catchers, depending on where you want to go with your lineup. Now, over here on FanDuel, I think you have a pretty good idea of what I'm about to talk about next for you. I want to talk about some low-risk wide receivers before we go back to the quarterback position, before we get to the tight end position, because once again, the framework for low-risk lineups here lately has been, let's revisit the quarterback after we've found what we want to do everywhere else in our lineups in DFS right now. So at the wide receiver position, this is a really, really strange week, I would say. It's a very interesting week for value. There's a lot of pay down options that the field is considering at wide receiver, and it's going to lead to some interesting constructions, I think, in low-risk contests. In our model, the number one wide receiver is CeeDee Lamb from the Dallas Cowboys. Lamb's going to project for 10 targets in our model, which is right near the top amongst the likes of like Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson. That's interesting. We'll get to him in a second. I do think Lamb is the pay-up option at wide receiver that's worth considering on this slate. Tyreek Hill with his ankle injury and his $9,900 price tag here on DraftKings, $10,200 over on FanDuel. Not exactly a low-risk play at this point. Did not practice at all this week for the Miami Dolphins. They listed him as questionable, but 3 straight DNPs for Tyreek is not really going to push us to where we want to go with considering him in low risk. Going to have to monitor his status going into lock time. If you want to play Tyreek, I would say leave him for tournament builds this week, especially. Lamb looks like the best pay-up option, but I just don't know if we can fit him in our low-risk lineups. I'll slot him in, and let's see if we can build a lineup we like with CeeDee Lamb in there on this video together. The value options at wide receiver are going to be amongst the most popular. And look at this, folks. I can promise you that it is, in fact, December of 2023. It is not December of 2017, despite the fact that Ezekiel Elliott at running back and Demarcus Robinson at wide receiver are 2 of the most popular plays on the board. We saw Tutu Atwell leave last week's game for the Rams with an injury, and that thrust Robinson into a much larger role for the Rams. Ran a ton of routes, had a decent amount of targets. Robinson has, I believe, 17 targets over the last 3 weeks for the Los Angeles Rams, so it's not like we're fabricating the opportunity for D-Rob here. He's legitimately an option here. 10 targets last week alone against the Baltimore Ravens. Scored a late touchdown that got him to a respectable 13.6 fantasy points. In each of the last 2 games with 5+ targets, he's had double-digit fantasy points. We can project him for the same playing time opportunity that he had last week against the Ravens here in this week's matchup with the Washington Commanders, who are the worst pass defense in the NFL by DVOA. So that is why the Rams are going to be super popular. Between these 2 options that project near the top of the ownership table in the Occupy model, D-Rob and Puka Nacua, D-Rob being half of the price of Nacua here on DraftKings, $2,400 less on FanDuel. I think D-Rob becomes a must-have in low-risk contests. As disgusting as that feels, has not really been a super relevant NFL player for a couple of years now since leaving the Kansas City Chiefs. But D-Rob here in this matchup with the Commanders going to be a very relevant player in Week 15, and that's what matters in DFS. So we want to play him in our low-risk lineups, probably in some tournament lineups depending on what you're stacking as well. 1 wide receiver spot left. We've got $3,800 per player remaining. This is pretty dicey trying to get both CMC and CeeDee Lamb in the same lineup. There is a way to make it work, though. The field is going to be playing Chig Okonkwo from the Tennessee Titans at just $2,900. 6 targets last week on Monday Night Football against the Dolphins. 6 targets the week before that against the Indianapolis Colts. 5 targets the week before that against the Carolina Panthers. Chig has a good matchup here. It's roughly league average. The Texans are roughly league average defending tight ends this year in the NFL, so definitely a viable option in low risk. At defense, one of the most popular plays that are available to you on DraftKings is the Buffalo Bills, believe it or not, in their home matchup with the high-powered Dallas Cowboys offense. This definitely feels scary with how Dallas has been throttling opposing defenses, but at $2,400, the Bills definitely allow you to get where we want to go with this lineup. We have $4,950 per player remaining. I can tell you 1 wide receiver spot left, 1 quarterback spot left. This is the point where I would like to discuss the quarterback position in low-risk contests. Matthew Stafford of the Los Angeles Rams. Normally, we're looking for a quarterback that has a dual threat scoring ability, quarterback that can score some points on the ground. This week, the field is not necessarily there. The field sees that Matthew Stafford has the 3rd best pass blocking offensive line this year, and that he's facing the worst pass defense in the NFL, and that he has a teammate that we can pair with him that's really cheap in low-risk contests. We have his running back that everyone's going to be playing in low-risk contests, and they're just getting Matthew Stafford into their low-risk lineups. And then a final wide receiver spot here of $3,900 in a CeeDee Lamb build is very doable. There are options in this range that we can play. Jonathan Mingo's on our underperforming wide receiver list for the Carolina Panthers. That'd be a little bit more of a high-risk option, I would say, but the opportunity definitely there with 25 targets over the last 3 weeks. Demario Douglas returning from concussion protocol for the Patriots. Really strong target share for Douglas before missing time with his concussion. He'll be another option in this range. So the field is absolutely going to land on some version of this lineup. I actually have the preference of coming off of CeeDee Lamb and playing some more of these value wide receivers that are near the top of the ownership table, one of which would be Garrett Wilson for me on the New York Jets. 17% on DraftKings. I was a little leery of Garrett last week, and he instantly proved to me that I really shouldn't be. 14 targets with Zach Wilson back under center, went over 100 yards, did not get into the end zone, and that's one reason, folks, why Garrett Wilson is one of our underperforming wide receivers on this slate. So a good play in high risk as well, but I think we can play him in low risk. I also think that we can play Jaden Reed at $4,900 in low risk contests. He's seeing a couple of jet sweep touches, rushes out of the backfield, and a very, very healthy target share from Jordan Love in this offense now. Christian Watson is anticipated to be out again for the Green Bay Packers. The Packers still with some lingering concerns with Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon at the running back position. This just leads to a much higher floor, in my opinion, for Jaden Reed as a wide receiver, one of my absolute favorite plays at the position. And now we got $8,200 for a wide receiver left. I actually think I am a little bit more a fan of upgrading from Chig and getting the number one tight end in terms of targets per route run over the last few weeks since he has become the full-time tight end for the Arizona Cardinals, and getting Trey McBride into my lineup. Going back down to $5,900 left at wide receiver. And then we have this group of Garrett Wilson, Chris Godwin, Terry McLaurin. This is where I think I prefer to be in low risk versus the CeeDee Lamb build that everyone is going to be on this week. But this is the rough framework of where everyone is going to be for sure in double ups, head-to-heads, etc., etc. So just keep that in mind. Same deal here over on FanDuel, a healthy 51.33 per player remaining. The number one defense over on FanDuel that everyone's going to play that's cheap is a little different than DraftKings. It's going to be the Carolina Panthers at just $3,300. So if you get them into a lineup, that upgrades your anticipated salary. I think this is actually a better spot to play Okonkwo at just $5,000 here on FanDuel, and lets you get to a pretty healthy wide receiver. Same group of guys, Garrett Wilson, Rashee Rice for the Chiefs, going to be very popular over on FanDuel in their matchup with the Patriots. A lot of ways you can go on FanDuel here as well for low risk contests. Now in high risk contests, I'm going to clear out the board. Don't usually do that in these videos, but we're going to have to think about the running backs in our entire lineups quite differently in high risk contests. The number one stack everyone is going to play is going to be the one that everyone's playing in low risk contests. It's going to be these Rams. It's going to be Antonio Gibson as a bring back at running back. So understand that I just put these plays on the board as your low risk lineup. They're going to be featured in a ton of high risk lineups. This is going to be another slate where you're going to see a lot of cash game lineups in tournaments. So how can we differentiate from the field? First things first, I do think playing a version of this stack is totally fine this week. The field is going to be on it for a reason. But if we want to differentiate and have a better chance of succeeding and outperforming our peers, we may want to play something slightly different. And thankfully, there are a lot of options on the board this week. Going to the quarterback position in the Occupy model, the number one play in our model this week is Brock Purdy of the San Francisco 49ers. Purdy's 49ers have the highest implied team total at just over 29 points. Purdy's number one running back is going to be very popular once again, and given his role in the passing game, we absolutely can pair McCaffrey with Purdy week in and week out. At wide receiver, we have seen Deebo Samuel just absolutely explode in recent weeks. Super efficient, 9 targets. He finally had an outsized opportunity last week. Just got a lot of touchdowns for Deebo in recent weeks. 3 receiving, 3 rushing. At some point, that has to come back down to earth, but maybe not now. One thing to be mindful of here is that he has roughly the same target share as his teammate Brandon Ayuk, who is $500 cheaper. Ayuk a much deeper average depth of target in the passing game, And in a matchup with the Cardinals, who are the worst defense against wide receiver ones, this actually could be a better spot for Brandon Ayuk, who would be one of my favorite stacking partners with Purdy on this slate. That's a three-man stack with the 49ers I think is very viable. And then we have Trey McBride of the Cardinals at tight end as a bringback. Definitely one of my favorite stacks on this slate. The Dallas Cowboys and the Buffalo Bills. This game is the highest total in betting markets, so obviously we need to be very mildly interested, at least in high-risk contests. It's going to be super expensive. There's a really high ceiling for the Cowboys' main weapons, CeeDee Lamb obviously being the principal one. I do think you can get Dak Prescott in against the Bills here. I do think Jake Ferguson at tight end becomes a really intriguing option if we're just considering value with the pricing. Ferguson has a slightly above average matchup. The Bills defense slightly below average defending tight ends in the passing game. So that is certainly one way to get to a high upside stack with the Cowboys. And then the biggest thing that I actually like on this slate with wide receivers with this game is the fact that we have two underperforming wide receivers on the Buffalo Bills. We did talk about Stephon Diggs a little bit last week. Obviously, we were disappointed. Gabriel Davis also underperforming, put up a 0 last week. Davis, the significantly more affordable option than Diggs, of course, for DFS purposes. Both these guys going to come in under 10% ownership on DraftKings. A little bit of a squeaky wheel, maybe getting the oil situation with Diggs. Has not had a very, very big game in over a month. That could be one way to go. It's just super expensive to build this way. So knowing what we know at the macro level, zooming out, looking at opportunities, Gabriel Davis, a very strong underperforming wide receiver opportunity on this slate. We know he's capable of the blow-up games. We know that his price fits what we're trying to do here in this stack. Davis with a 18-yard average depth of target over the last 3 weeks and definitely capable of providing that ceiling and differentiation in this price range we're looking for in large field high-risk contests. I do think Gabe Davis would be my favorite bringback in a Dak Prescott stack. That also fits the framework of the salary that we're working with here. Not really going to ever advocate for playing a quarterback against defense on a 10-game slate, but if you do need a cheap defense here on DraftKings to make this fit, I think the Patriots is definitely in play against the Chiefs. They have been a good defense all year long, and they shouldn't kill you in this spot. So fits the salary framework, 50-50 per player remaining here to finish up a lineup. We have the Demarcus Robinson chalk at wide receiver. We have Antonio Gibson as a cheap running back. And now we've upgraded the salary to a point where I think you can start to see a viable build with the Dallas Cowboys as the primary stack side of this very, very high total late game between the Bills and the Cowboys. If we flip the script and we want to use Josh Allen and the favored home Buffalo Bills, I do think the best way to play the Cowboys is to hope and pray that the production goes through the running back, Tony Pollard, at his affordable $6,700 salary here on DraftKings, $7,000 over on FanDuel. And it's not out of the realm of possibility that is, in fact, what happens here, because the Bills are below average defending running backs in the running game, and Pollard tends to shine there for them. Finally seeing the targets tick up a little bit in the last few weeks, 4+ targets in each of the last 4 games after seeing none against the New York Giants in week number 10. I think we can comfortably assume Pollard is a really interesting option as a bringback. I don't think Pollard is a good stack pairing partner with Dak Prescott, given how they pass the ball around. And if Pollard is scoring, it's most likely going to be on the ground. That could impact the quarterback stack pretty negatively. But as a bringback with the Bills, definitely an option here. Obviously, we want to try to get Stephon Diggs in as the best stack partner for the Buffalo Bills, but there are options at tight end as well. We have Dalton Kincaid with a really healthy target share. Still 8 targets last week against the Chiefs, despite the return of Dawson Knox and some more 2 tight end sets for the Bills. Kincaid, definitely a great option as a result, fitting the salary, $6,600 per player remaining to finish up a Bills stack here. Like I said, we definitely want to be considering ways to make a Bills and Cowboys stack lineup work this week, because that is where the points are largely going to be on this slate. This is a 50.5 point total. Both teams have 2 of the 4 highest implied team totals on this slate, and they're really right there alongside the extremely popular Los Angeles Rams stack and the extremely high upside San Francisco 49ers stack, 49ers having the highest implied team total on this slate. That's how I'm thinking about week 15 in the NFL. Very interesting slate here. Very big slate for us here at Occupy. Brian will be live here on YouTube tomorrow morning before lock to go over all of his top plays and strategies for this week's slate. He will be live with Moose. Time to be announced, so keep an eye on when that live show is scheduled. It's a good reason to make sure that you're subscribed to the channel and have the notifications turned on for when we schedule those videos. Very big week for Brian, I'm sure you all know at this point, and he will be giving you the inside track on how he's approaching his very big small field contest in the FFWC in Arizona this week. Good luck in week number 15, folks. I will be back next week to talk to you about week 16.